We think if you get the prices in markets right, including the prices of things that are externalities like the costs of carbon use and things like that, then markets can do their thing. And you heard the applause that Mike got when he said the government shouldn't be in the position or in the business of picking winners and losers. But if you come back down to the level of basic research, which is the production of new ideas that could be used in applied research down at the downstream, if you will, then those things, basic research is something that private industry and private markets are less good at because it's hard to capture the returns on those sorts of things. So that's what an economist calls a public good, and that's why so much basic research is funded by government and philanthropy and the like. DOE will go on a rampage of wanting something done, and then 3 years later the funding is not there to support it. And that might be just an inevitable part of the political cycle because it's Congress that appropriates this money, and then DOE gets to decide how and where it's used in large part. Let's come back to carbon pricing and taxing the use of carbon-based fuels. Well, it's not an easy thing to do. You know, economists would tell you, well, the optimal policy, if you want to internalize the costs of using carbon-based fuels, is to tax the stuff and then let markets do their thing, both in terms of incentives to consume and use alternatives, or on the supply side to develop alternatives. Well, we can do that, but it's only going to work if there's a homogenized policy across the world, because the atmosphere doesn't care what part of the planet a particular ton of carbon came from. It has the same impact worldwide. And so unless China wants to go along with us, and we have to ask ourselves why China would want to go along with us, then a unilateral policy of raising prices in order to achieve something with regard to climate change is not going to be very effective. And it'll make oil cheaper for the Chinese and Indians, but it's not going to have much impact on the total amount of carbon entering the atmosphere and therefore on climate change. And those are the kinds of things we have to think about. So it may be that carbon pricing is not the optimal the optimal unilateral policy for a country. I'm just going to leave it there because it's unlikely we're going to have these homogenized policies going forward. You heard about the liquefied natural gas possibilities, or just natural gas possibilities for building out infrastructure on defined routes. So you've got a route from Los Angeles for heavy-duty trucks from Los Angeles to Chicago. And it's an easier build out of the infrastructure there. I don't think it has so much to do with accounting as it has to do with just basic economics. If it's cheaper to use that stuff, then the trucking industry is going to do it. Before you want to drive your truck from LA to Chicago, you better find out there's a place to put the gas in. And one of the things that alternative energy sources have to deal with is the chicken and egg problem that was solved by cars. We have both gas stations and we have cars. And they built cars even though there weren't that many gas stations, and they put up gas stations even though there weren't that many cars. But the new technologies have to compete with that infrastructure that already exists. And some of them can sort of leverage off of that infrastructure, if you will. So you could have charging stations or especially natural gas filling capacity at perhaps the network of types of stations that are already in existence. An example that Bill would use, he tells a good story that he only alluded to it here. But last year when he was in my class, he had just come the day before from San Francisco, and he had driven in in this case, a particular company, Google, had outfitted one of his Priuses, and he drove it around on I-10 for I think he said 45 minutes at 70 miles an hour. And it was a totally uneventful day, except that nobody touched the steering wheel. And for that particular technology, you can drive it to work one day, and the car memorizes the route, and then you could put your dog in the driver's seat the next day and get there. It might cause people driving next to him on the road to take a second look, but the car would get there and everything would be safe and okay. Now, as we do that kind of thing, we get those kinds of technologies, you might imagine and they're the experts on this, not me, but I'm going to get on the freeway, and there's a bunch of cars that are more like a train than the traffic that we're accustomed to seeing. And then a little gap opens up, and then I'm in the train. And when we come to the stoplights, instead of having people start in waves, we start like a train, because we can all start moving at the same time because we're electronically connected to each other, even though we're not physically connected to each other. And that kind of thing has important economic implications because of the amount of infrastructure we would need. We could accommodate a lot more transportation services with the same roads and things that we have now if things operated like that. And the foreseeable technology is that it might operate like that. If a country grows in terms of its income per capita, then its per capita consumption of energy is going to grow. So I kind of look at it as a positive thing, because there are billions of people in the world that don't share the prosperity that we have. And given the resources we have, at least in the short term, the growth of China and India is going to make oil and other energy sources a bit more expensive for us. But the good side of it is that billions of people are finding their way out of poverty. Energy is the necessary thing that's got to occur before prosperity does. And some people then have called the energy problem the biggest social problem of our time, because once you solve that, other things fall into place.